Good afternoon, folks. Well, I don't know what to say. I mean, as much as I hate Biden to the moon and back, like I told my girlfriend yesterday, I was rooting for him against Russian Vladimir Putin. But, as I said before, his actions at the summit in Switzerland proved otherwise. Yeah, he is not a winner. He lost big time. He lost once again because he just pretty much, Russian President Vladimir Putin pretty much sat there, calm, cool, and collective, like nothing really happened. Like an average debate would go on. Not necessarily a debate, just like talking to one another. Like nothing really happening, just like, okay. Like Trump did. For instance, let's talk about Putin here for a moment. Putin has dealt with so many adversaries, including the United States. Let's do a little background history with Russia first, in the United States. For many years, the United States has been adversaries with Russia. When they were only known as the Soviet Union, for instance, that's when they became adversaries. That's when they were known as the communists. But then they switched over to being the Rush. Then they switched back to Russia when they were known as, and they had the same. Then they got the flag back that they once had when they were only known as Russia. But the friendship goes back to World War I and beyond, when it was known as the Civil War. Because during the Civil War era, the Russians were mainly on our side. The French, well, add the French to that. The French, pretty much, were kind of like our adversary at the time, kind of like what Russia is now. I'm not really exactly sure why the French were. I think maybe they're kind of holding a grudge against us due to the fact we had a little mini war against them in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars in 1800, even though that war didn't even last. That wasn't even a declared war. I think they're just holding a little bit of a grudge against us, and they never really let that one go. But I think relations kind of improved. They just never really lofted over the air yet. I mean, there was things that just never really lifted off the air. While on the other hand, other countries like Great Britain, somehow they managed to let it all go. But going on. The French moved on, they kind of let it go. And they eventually did let it go. Russia, they stayed right there. They still remained a little bit of adversary, even though we kind of fought side by side with them in other wars. Then along came the Crimean War. The United States stayed neutral in that war. They never really entered the war for either side. The French asked them to join, and so did the Russians. But neither side really got involved in. But the United States never really got into the war because neither country really offered them much of anything. So they said, nah, you guys fight it out. That's your war. So, with that being said, then we go on to Civil War just a few years later, in 1861. Well, as you know, the Battle of Bull Run happens, and the French pretty much will starting looking at them along with the British. So the adversaries, the French talked to the British, they were adversaries for years and years and years. Then they kind of lifted that off, including the 100 Years' War. Then they lifted that off. Then they kind of stayed cool with one another, and then the French started talking to the British. So they started looking at the Confederates, realizing, hey, they're winning big battles. The Battle of Bull Run, Fredericksburg. So they started looking eyes at the Confederates. But, however, Lincoln warned them that if you get involved, there's going to be consequences. So they backed off, even though some ships were seized. But one Battle of Schaumburg, right off the French coast, The United States and the Confederacy, the Union and the Confederacy fought. And the CSS Alabama was sunk in that battle. Literally to the full mast. And literally about half of its crew was captured, a few killed, and the other half was rescued by a British schooner. And the British schooner transported them back into France, back into neutral France. That was in 1864, close to the end of the Civil War. But other times there was like neutral ships that were like British and French that were captured, sending cotton to the south. But also, on the other hand, there were French ships sending other things to the Union, sending cannons to the Union. So they kind of worked both ways a little bit. So they're kind of friendly and yet kind of enemy. While on the other hand, Russia was friends to the United States because they said, if the French start firing upon you, we will fire back. That's where Russia played the role. They were waiting for the French or the British to do the mess. They were waiting on them to make the wrong move, and then they were going to get involved. So they were on standby for the Union. They were full-blown allies with the Union then. Then came World War I. The Bolshevik rise up. The Bolsheviks rose up and fought against and turned Russia into a complete, utter disaster zone. Into a socialist, aka communist regime. Kind of like what Venezuela is. The promised land. Worked at first, then it just turned into a dump zone. And then came World War II. The United States seemed alright, but then they didn't really want to make a deal with the Soviet Union. But then, the only way they could actually win the war is if they actually made a deal. Kind of like, I can't remember what show that is. If someone can actually tell me what it is in the comments below, I'd be really grateful. I made a deal with the devil. Is technically what it was. I don't remember what show that is from. So, that's what it was. That was where the quote was from. If someone can tell me what show that quote is from, I'd be grateful. Because I have absolutely the slightest idea. Now, on to the other part. As we go down the line in history. Then the Soviets absolutely hated our guts after that. Soviets were against us. The Russians hated us. The Korean War. There was Russians that served for the North Koreans, shot down numerous American planes and MiG-15s, but however, the Americans fought back and shot down numerous planes. Hats off to them. Then we go on. Vietnam. I mean, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. Then from Vietnam, they just started sending planes to our adversaries. To our enemies. They never really cared about what we thought. That's just literally how it went. Then finally in 91, it all changed. The communism ended and they went back to Russia. But we never really regained back their total respect because we never really went back the way it should have been. We never really went back the way it was. I mean, that's literally how you gotta look at it. It never went back the way it should have been. It never went back the way it was during World War I or the Civil War. It just went back to the ugly. They just went back to normal being Russia. It seems like they're still in this past of during the Russian Revolution, the World War II era. They're still hating us. However, with that being said, we'll go on to what's going on nowadays. Vladimir Putin, with past presidents who tried to visit with him, walked all over him. Walked literally over every single one of them. Why? Because, like he said in a quote during an interview with MSM or someone, I can't remember who, Biden is just a career politician. Trump was a businessman. And you got to get to know your adversaries. And Trump did that. He got to know his adversaries. He always wanted to get to know his adversaries. And that's what he was good at. He always got to know his adversaries before anything. And when he went to know his adversaries, voila. He made deals with adversaries and he made them pay. Interesting. Interesting how you make your adversaries pay, isn't it? And then voila. The adversaries get paid. The adversaries pay for it. Every adversary that the Russians dealt with were just walkovers. Like the French were during the Franco-Prussian War. They just were walked all over by the Germans. AKA Prussians at the time, because they weren't quite Germany. They were just walked all over. That's literally how this all looks. That they were walked all over. Trampled. Nothing left of them. And then you look at how other things look. Then Trump came along. Pretty much, well, he would throw one. Let's just put it this way. We'll talk a little about kind of how this would be a baseball game. He would throw curveballs and turn fastballs, splints, and other kind of throws at presidents, past presidents, and Biden. While Biden just kept on throwing the same old. When Trump was in office, Trump would throw the passball and the curveball. Whenever he threw something at Trump would throw a curveball at him, and it would be something totally different he wasn't expecting. While all the others just kept on throwing the same thing, and he knew exactly what was coming at him. The Russian Vladimir Putin knew exactly what was coming at him. I mean, that's literally what this was all about. They're all about knowing what was coming at them, and they knew what to expect. While Trump threw totally curveballs at them, and they didn't know what hit them. Literally every countryman got him surprised. And that's what you need to do to win battles. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, doesn't seem to understand that. To win wars, you gotta jump down, you gotta prove it. You can't just sit back and expect them to happen. Unlike Biden, who just sat there and then he just went off on the mainstream media, who supported him since day one. And he just went off on them like no other. Surprisingly. I'm so shocked. I'm literally surprised he did that. I never saw that day coming. Now the question is, will they continue to support him? Most likely. I mean, hell, they literally hate Trump. Well, Don Lemonhead always talks about the insurrection all the time. I call him Don Lemonhead, because I hate his guts. So, here's the thing I got for you, Don. You always tell us to forget about 9/11. Well, guess what? It ain't happening. We ain't forgetting about it, so why don't you get over it? We will not get over it. So why don't you get over us not getting over it? It's a date we will never forget. And this American flag ain't going anywhere. With that being said, hit the like button, hit the bell so you can get notifications when I post something on here. And with that being said, I'm out of here because I got things I gotta do. Peace.